My heart shattered into pieces when I heard my daughter's trembling voice say, "Mom, he hit me over Pepper." I stood there, the phone clutched in my hand, as my world spun around me. My husband sat 5 feet away, his eyes never leaving his newspaper. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. Before we begin, I'd be truly grateful if you'd take a moment to like this video and consider subscribing to the channel. It helps me keep sharing these stories with those who need them most. I wake up every morning at 5:30 in our small Chicago apartment on the north side. The radiator clanks and hisses, reminding me that winter never truly leaves this city, even in April. I can hear the L train rumbling past, carrying people to jobs that matter, to lives that matter. I slip out of bed carefully, trying not to disturb Richard, though he wouldn't notice anyway. He sleeps like the dead these days, or perhaps he's just learned to ignore me even in his dreams. My feet touch the cold hardwood floor, and I shuffle to the kitchen in my worn pink slippers, the ones Sarah gave me for Mother's Day 3 years ago. The left one has a hole near the toe now. I keep meaning to replace them, but they're the last gift she gave me before she married Derek and moved to the suburbs. The morning light filters through the thin curtains, casting pale shadows across the kitchen floor. I pause for a moment, looking at those shadows, remembering when this apartment felt full of life and promise. When Sarah was young, she'd dance in these same shadows, twirling in her nightgown before school, her laughter filling every corner of our home. Now the silence is so thick I can almost touch it, broken only by the rhythmic drip of the coffee maker and the distant sound of car horns from the street below. The kitchen smells like yesterday's coffee grounds and something sour I can't quite place. I rinse out the pot and start a fresh brew, watching the dark liquid drip into the carafe. The sound is methodical, predictable, unlike everything else in my life. I prepare Richard's breakfast the way he likes it. 2 eggs over easy, toast with butter on one side only, orange juice in the blue glass because he says it tastes better that way. I set it on the table where he'll sit in exactly 20 minutes, open his newspaper, and eat without saying a word to me. This has been our routine for 37 years. But that morning, everything changed. My phone buzzed on the counter, Sarah's name lighting up the screen. She never calls this early. My hands trembled as I answered, and her voice came through broken and small, like she was 6 years old again and had scraped her knee on the playground. "Mom, he hit me over Pepper." The words didn't make sense at first. I thought I'd misheard. "What? Sarah, what are you saying?" She was crying now, really crying, the kind of sobs that shake your whole body. "I was making dinner last night, and I asked Derek if he wanted black pepper or red pepper flakes on his pasta, and he just, Mom, he hit me. He slapped me across the face and told me to stop asking stupid questions." I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, ragged and uneven, punctuated by small gasps that made my chest constrict. In the background, I heard their dog barking, the same golden retriever they'd adopted last year, posting photos all over social media about their perfect little family. The irony wasn't lost on me. Behind every perfect picture is a story no one tells. The coffee pot was still dripping. I could hear it in the silence that followed. Drip, drip, drip. Each drop felt like a hammer against my skull. "Where is he now?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. "He's at work. He left like nothing happened. Mom, I don't know what to do." I looked over at Richard, who had just walked into the kitchen. He was adjusting his reading glasses, reaching for the newspaper I'd already set out for him. "Richard," I said, my voice cracking. "Richard, it's Sarah. Derek hit her." He glanced up at me for maybe half a second, then back down at the headlines. He grunted, sitting down to his perfectly prepared eggs. That was it. That was all I got. I stood there frozen, phone still pressed against my ear, watching as he picked up his fork with his left hand and turned a page with his right. The mechanical precision of his movements, the complete lack of emotion on his face, the way he reached for the salt shaker without even acknowledging what I'd just said. In that moment, something crystallized in my mind with brutal clarity. This wasn't just indifference. This was a deliberate choice to not care, to not engage, to not be present for the most important crisis our family had ever faced. I remember standing there, phone pressed to my ear, watching my husband eat his breakfast as if I'd just told him about the weather. Sarah was still crying, waiting for me to say something, to do something, to be her mother. And in that moment, I saw my entire life spread out before me like those old photographs in the album on our shelf. The wedding photo, me in white with flowers in my hair, believing Richard when he said he'd always protect me and our future family. The hospital picture, holding newborn Sarah, her tiny fingers wrapped around mine. Every birthday party I'd thrown, every scraped knee I'd kissed, every nightmare I'd chased away. And here she was, grown and hurting, and I was standing in a kitchen that smelled like failure, watching my husband ignore her pain the same way he'd ignored mine for decades. I spent 43 years trying to build something beautiful out of nothing. I met Richard when I was 19, working at a diner on Roosevelt Road. He was older, 28, and he seemed so sure of himself, so confident. He told me I was pretty, that I was special, that he'd take care of me. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. My mother had died the year before, and my father was a stranger even when he was sitting across from me at dinner. I was desperate for someone to see me, to choose me. Richard did choose me, in his way. We got married 6 months later in a small ceremony at City Hall. I wore a cream-colored dress from Marshall Fields that I'd saved for 3 months to buy. I remember that day so vividly now, though I've tried for years to forget the details. The dress had tiny pearl buttons down the back that my best friend Jenny had to help me fasten. Richard showed up 15 minutes late, reeking of cigarette smoke, with no explanation or apology. I laughed it off then, told myself he was just nervous. Jenny pulled me aside in the courthouse bathroom and asked me point blank if I was sure about this. "He doesn't look at you the way a man should look at his bride," she said, touching up my lipstick in the mirror. I'd gotten defensive, told her she didn't understand him like I did. I never spoke to Jenny again after that day. She'd seen the truth I couldn't face. The first few years weren't bad. He worked at a manufacturing plant, steady hours, decent pay. I kept working at the diner because I liked it, liked the routine, liked feeling useful. When I got pregnant with Sarah, Richard insisted I quit. "A mother should be home," he said, and I agreed because that's what people did then. That's what I thought love looked like. I spent my days in our tiny apartment, watching soap operas and folding laundry, and waiting for Richard to come home and tell me about his day. He never did. He'd walk in, grunt hello, eat whatever I'd cooked, and fall asleep in front of the television. But I told myself that was normal, that was marriage, that was what I'd signed up for. When Sarah was born, I thought things would change. I thought he'd soften, become tender, fall in love with this perfect little person we'd created. He held her once in the hospital, looked at her with what I desperately wanted to believe was love, and then handed her back to me. "She's all yours," he said, and he meant it. For the next 18 years, I raised Sarah alone while living with her father. I went to every parent-teacher conference by myself. I nursed her through every fever, helped her with every homework assignment, taught her how to braid her hair and ride a bike and believe in herself. Richard was there, but he wasn't present. He was a shadow that ate dinner and paid the mortgage and occasionally asked if we needed anything from the store. I remember the night Sarah learned to ride her bike without training wheels. She was 7 years old, wearing shorts with grass stains on the knees and a purple helmet that was slightly too big for her head. We'd been practicing for weeks in the alley behind our building, me running alongside her, my hand on the seat to steady her. That evening, she finally found her balance. pedaling furiously down the alley with the biggest smile on her face. "Mom, I'm doing it. I'm really doing it," she screamed, her voice echoing off the brick walls. I was so proud I started crying right there. When we came back upstairs, breathless and excited, Richard was in his chair watching the game. "Dad, I can ride my bike now," Sarah announced, bouncing on her toes. He glanced at her briefly. "That's good," he said, then turned back to the television. The light went out of her eyes in that moment, and I saw her learn a lesson I'd hoped she'd never have to learn. That some people will never celebrate you no matter how hard you try. I worked so hard to give Sarah everything I never had. When she wanted to go to college, I got a job at the grocery store to help pay for it. Richard said we couldn't afford it, that she should get a job instead, but I wouldn't let her dreams die the way mine had. I worked 6 days a week, standing on my feet for 8 hours at a time, scanning items and smiling at customers and pretending my back didn't ache and my legs didn't throb. I saved every extra penny in a coffee can hidden in the back of the linen closet. Richard never knew about it. He didn't care enough to ask where the tuition money came from. Sarah studied business at DePaul University. She was so bright, so full of potential. She graduated with honors, got a job at a consulting firm downtown, started making more money than I'd ever seen in my life. She moved into her own apartment in Lincoln Park, decorated it with modern furniture and abstract art I didn't understand but pretended to appreciate. She was becoming someone I barely recognized, someone polished and professional, someone who belonged in boardrooms and cocktail parties. I was so proud of her. I was also terrified that I was losing her. Then she met Derek at a company retreat. He was handsome, ambitious, charming in that practiced way that some men are. He reminded me of Richard when we first met. That same confidence that feels like safety until you realize it's just arrogance. They dated for a year before he proposed with a diamond ring that cost more than my first car. The wedding was beautiful, held at a fancy venue in the suburbs with 200 guests I didn't know. I wore a navy dress that Sarah helped me pick out, stood in the receiving line shaking hands with strangers, and smiled until my face hurt. Richard gave a toast that lasted 45 seconds and mentioned how expensive the wedding was twice. I watched my daughter dance with her new husband and prayed I was wrong about him. During the reception, I found a quiet moment alone in the bathroom, staring at my reflection in the gilt-edged mirror. I looked tired, older than my 57 years. The navy dress Sarah had picked out was beautiful, but felt like a costume. I could hear the music and laughter filtering through the door, and I wanted to burst out there and scream at everyone to stop, to tell them this was all wrong, that I recognized the way Derek looked at Sarah because it was the same way Richard had looked at me 38 years ago. But I didn't. I smoothed down my dress, reapplied my lipstick, and went back out to smile and make small talk with people who would forget my name by morning. They bought a house in Naperville, one of those new constructions with granite countertops and a 2-car garage. Derek made good money, enough that Sarah could have quit her job if she wanted to, but she loved her work. She was good at it. They seemed happy, or at least that's what I told myself during our increasingly rare phone calls. She was busy, she said. Work was demanding. Derek had a lot of client dinners. They were planning to start a family soon, maybe next year, maybe the year after. I listened to her excuses and swallowed my concerns because what else could I do? She was an adult now, making her own choices, building her own life. But I noticed things, small things at first. The way Derek would interrupt her when she was talking. The way he'd make jokes at her expense and then tell her she was too sensitive when she didn't laugh. The way he'd check her phone when he thought no one was watching. I mentioned it once to Richard, tested the waters, said something like, "Derek seems a bit controlling, don't you think?" Richard looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "He's successful," Richard said. "Sarah's lucky to have him." And that was that. My concerns were dismissed, invalidated, treated like the worries of a paranoid old woman who didn't understand modern relationships. The calls from Sarah became less frequent. Once a week became, once a month became holidays and birthdays only. When we did talk, she sounded tired, stressed, like she was reading from a script. Everything was fine. Great, actually. Just really busy. Derek was working on a big project. They'd gone to a nice restaurant for their anniversary. The house needed new gutters. Surface-level updates that told me nothing about her actual life, her actual feelings. I wanted to push, to ask the real questions, but I was afraid. Afraid she'd pull away even more. Afraid she'd stop calling altogether. Afraid I'd lose the last connection I had to the daughter I'd raised to be strong and independent, only to watch her shrink herself to fit into someone else's idea of who she should be. My own life had become a series of repetitive motions. Wake up, make breakfast, clean the apartment, go to the grocery store for my shift, come home, make dinner, watch television, go to bed, repeat. Richard and I existed in the same space, but lived completely separate lives. We hadn't had a real conversation in years. We hadn't touched each other, not even accidentally, in longer than I could remember. Our bedroom had twin beds now, pushed to opposite sides of the room like we were children at summer camp avoiding each other. I slept alone every night, listening to him snore, wondering how we'd ended up here. Wondering if this was all there was. Wondering if I'd wasted my entire life on people who didn't even notice I existed. My 60th birthday came on a Tuesday in March. I woke up that morning with a small flutter of hope in my chest. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe Richard would remember. Maybe Sarah would call. I made my usual breakfast, but I added a slice of coffee cake I'd bought the day before, a small celebration for myself. Richard ate his eggs, drank his coffee, and left for his part-time job at the hardware store without saying a word. Not even happy birthday. Not even a glance. I sat at the table alone, staring at that coffee cake, and I couldn't bring myself to eat it. I went through my shift at the grocery store in a daze. My coworker Maria asked if I was okay. I lied and said I was fine, just tired. She gave me a sympathetic smile and a squeeze on the shoulder, and that small gesture of kindness made me want to cry right there in aisle 7. I came home to an empty apartment. No card, no flowers, no acknowledgement that I'd spent 60 years on this earth, 43 of them dedicated to a man who couldn't be bothered to remember the day I was born. I ordered Chinese food for dinner, ate it straight from the container, and went to bed early. Sarah called 3 days later to apologize. She'd been swamped at work. She'd meant to call. She'd send a card. The card never came. 2 weeks after my forgotten birthday, I was balancing our checkbook, something I did every month to make sure Richard's sporadic spending didn't overdraw our account. He'd been better about money lately, or so I thought. I noticed a charge I didn't recognize, $350 at a jewelry store downtown. My heart started pounding. For one brief, stupid moment, I thought maybe he'd bought me a birthday present after all, that he'd just been waiting for the right moment. I called the store, gave them the transaction number, and asked what had been purchased. A man's watch, the clerk told me. Silver band, leather strap, engraved on the back. Would I like to know what the engraving said? I couldn't speak. I just hung up. I found the watch that evening in Richard's sock drawer. I wasn't snooping. I was putting away his laundry like I'd done for 40 years. The box was tucked under a pile of black socks, poorly hidden, like he didn't care if I found it or not. I opened it with shaking hands. The watch was beautiful, expensive, everything he'd never bought me. I turned it over and read the engraving. To Richard, for all the years, from Richard. He'd bought himself an anniversary present with our money, with my money really, since I was the one still working, still contributing, still trying to keep us afloat while he worked part-time and spent full-time. I stood in our bedroom holding that watch, and something inside me cracked. Not broke, not yet, but cracked like ice on a pond when the temperature starts to rise. I heard the front door open, heard Richard's heavy footsteps in the hallway, heard him settle into his chair in the living room. I walked out holding the watch box, stood in front of him and asked very calmly, "What is this?" He looked up from his newspaper, saw the box, and shrugged. I needed a new watch. That was it. No explanation, no apology. Just a shrug and an expectation that I'd accept it and move on, because that's what I always did. "You spent $350 on a watch for yourself," I said, my voice steady even though I was shaking. "I've been working extra hours to save money. I thought we were saving for that trip to see the Grand Canyon, the one we've been talking about for 10 years. Richard folded his newspaper with deliberate slowness. "We can still go," he said. "Just work a few more shifts." And there it was, the casual dismissal. The assumption that my time, my energy, my body were infinite resources he could spend without consequence. I opened my mouth to argue, to scream, to cry, to make him see me for once in his life. But what came out was nothing. Just silence. I turned around, walked into the kitchen, and the watch box slipped from my hands, hitting the floor with a soft thud. I picked up my favorite mug, the one Sarah had made in art class when she was 12. It had a wobbly handle and uneven glaze, but I'd treasured it for years. I was filling it with water when my hands started trembling so badly that the mug slipped and shattered on the floor. Pieces of clay scattered across the linoleum, and I stood there staring at them, watching my daughter's 12-year-old handwork destroyed because my husband couldn't see me as a person worth considering. I got down on my knees and started picking up the pieces, and that's when I started crying. Not loud, dramatic sobs, just quiet tears that fell onto the broken ceramic, making small, wet circles that disappeared almost as soon as they formed. Richard didn't come to check on me. I heard the television turn on in the living room, heard the familiar sounds of the evening news. He didn't care that I was crying. He probably didn't even hear it. I gathered all the pieces I could find, held them in my cupped hands like I could somehow put them back together. And then I threw them all in the trash. I washed my hands, dried them on the dish towel, and stood there in the kitchen having the most dangerous thought I'd had in decades. What if I said no? What if I just stopped? Stopped cooking his meals and doing his laundry, and pretending that this marriage was anything more than a legal arrangement between two people who'd forgotten how to love each other, if we'd ever known how in the first place? That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my twin bed, listening to Richard snore, and I thought about all the times I'd swallowed my feelings to keep the peace. All the times I'd accepted less than I deserved because I was afraid of being alone. All the times I'd convinced myself that this was enough, that I should be grateful, that things could be worse. I thought about my mother, who died at 59, who'd spent her whole life serving a man who barely acknowledged her existence. I thought about Sarah, who'd watched me model that same self-erasure and was now living it herself with Derek. I thought about the woman I'd been at 19, full of hope and dreams, and I mourned her like you'd mourn a death. At 2 a.m, I got up and went to the hall closet where we kept our photo albums. I pulled out the oldest one, the one with our wedding photos and baby pictures and all those snapshots of a life I thought we were building together. I sat on the couch in the dark and flipped through the pages, looking at that young woman in the cream-colored dress who believed love was enough. I looked at myself holding Sarah in the hospital, exhausted but glowing with a kind of joy I hadn't felt in years. I looked at birthday parties and Christmases and ordinary Tuesday afternoons, and in every single picture, I was smiling. But Richard was always slightly out of frame, slightly out of focus, slightly absent even when he was present. I closed the album and put it back in the closet. Then I took down all the framed photos from the living room shelves, the ones I dusted every week, the ones that told the story of our family to anyone who visited, not that anyone ever did anymore. I stacked them carefully in a box and put the box in the back of the closet next to the albums. When Richard woke up the next morning, he didn't notice they were gone. He ate his breakfast, read his paper, and left for work without commenting on the empty shelves. I stood in the living room looking at the clean spaces where the photos had been, and I felt something that might have been relief. The days after that were strange. I went through my routines, but everything felt different, like I was watching myself from outside my body. I made breakfast, but I only made enough for myself. I did laundry, but I only washed my clothes. Richard noticed eventually, asked where his clean shirts were, and I told him the laundry room was down the hall. He could figure it out. He stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language, but he didn't argue. He just went to work in yesterday's shirt. Small rebellions, tiny acts of self-preservation, baby steps towards something I couldn't quite name yet. Then Sarah called that morning, and everything sharpened into focus. Her voice on the phone, broken and scared. Her husband, the man she'd promised to love and honor, hitting her over something as trivial as pepper. And Richard, sitting 5 feet away, responding with all the emotional depth of a piece of furniture. In that moment, I understood with perfect clarity that this was my crossroads. I could stay silent like I'd been silent my whole life, accepting unacceptable things because that's what I'd been taught to do. Or I could step in. I could be for my daughter what no one had ever been for me. "Sarah," I said, my voice stronger than I'd heard it in years, "pack a bag. I'm coming to get you." I heard her sharp intake of breath. "Mom, I can't just leave. Derek will be furious, and where would I even go?" I looked at Richard, still reading his paper like my daughter's pain was background noise. "You'll come here," I said. "You'll stay with me as long as you need to. And Derek can be as furious as he wants, but he won't touch you again." Sarah started crying harder, but this time it sounded different. Relieved, maybe. Or maybe just shocked that someone was finally choosing her. "But Mom," Sarah's voice wavered, "what if I'm overreacting? What if I made him angry? He's been under so much stress at work. Maybe I should have known better than to ask him questions when he was tired. Maybe I cut her off, my voice sharp with a clarity I didn't know I possessed. "Sarah Elizabeth, listen to me very carefully. There is no maybe. There is no excuse. There is no amount of stress that makes it okay for a man to hit his wife. Do you hear me? No amount." The line went quiet except for her ragged breathing. I could picture her in that beautiful house, probably standing in the kitchen where it happened, looking at the pasta that had cooled on the stove, touching her cheek where his hand had left its mark. "Pack your bag, baby. I'll be there in 40 minutes. I hung up the phone and started pulling out the guest room bedding I'd stored in the linen closet. Richard finally looked up from his newspaper. "What are you doing?" he asked, and I could hear the irritation in his voice. "Sarah's coming to stay with us," I said, not looking at him. "Her husband hit her." Richard folded his newspaper with a sigh. "That's between them," he said. "You shouldn't get involved in their marriage." I stopped what I was doing and turned to face him. "Their marriage?" I repeated. "Richard, he hit our daughter. He physically assaulted her, and you think I shouldn't get involved?" He stood up, and for a second I thought he might actually engage, might actually feel something. But he just shook his head and said, "Women always exaggerate these things. I'm sure it wasn't that bad. They'll work it out." And there it was. 43 years of marriage distilled into one sentence. Women always exaggerate. Your pain isn't real. Your fear isn't valid. Your experience doesn't matter. I felt that crack inside me split wide open. "Get out," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "What?" Richard looked genuinely confused. "Get out of this apartment. Go to work, go to a bar, go wherever you want. But get out of my sight before I say something we'll both regret." He left, muttering about hormones and overreaction, and I didn't care. I didn't care if he came back. I didn't care what he thought. I cared about Sarah, about getting to her before she talked herself into staying. Before Derek convinced her she'd overreacted, before she became me. I grabbed my purse and car keys, The ones to the old Honda we'd bought 10 years ago that barely ran, but was mine. Paid for with my grocery store wages. I drove to Naperville faster than I'd driven in decades, my hands gripping the wheel, my mind racing with everything I wanted to say to Derek if I saw him, everything I'd wanted to say to Richard for years, but never had the courage. The drive felt both endless and too short. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting Derek's car to appear behind me, though I knew he was at work. The suburbs stretched out in neat rows, each house a carbon copy of the next, lawns perfectly manicured, driveways with their 2 cars and their basketball hoops and their American dreams. I wondered how many of these houses held secrets like Sarah's. How many women were hiding bruises and broken spirits behind those cheerful front doors with their seasonal wreaths and welcome mats. Sarah was waiting on the porch when I pulled up, a small duffel bag at her feet. Her left cheek was red and swollen, the mark of her husband's hand visible even from the street. I got out of the car and walked up to her, and she collapsed into my arms like she used to when she was little and had nightmares. "I'm sorry," she kept saying. "I'm so sorry, Mom." And I held her and told her she had nothing to be sorry for, that this wasn't her fault, that she deserved so much better. I helped her into the car, threw her bag in the back, and we drove away from that perfect suburban house with its granite countertops and its 2-car garage and its broken dreams. We didn't talk much on the drive back. Sarah stared out the window, and I could see her mind working, probably already making excuses for Derek, already wondering if she'd overreacted. I'd done the same thing so many times with Richard, convinced myself that I was too sensitive, too demanding, too much. But I wasn't going to let her do that. Not this time. When we got back to the apartment, Richard still wasn't home. I set Sarah up in the guest room, gave her clean towels, and told her to rest. She looked so small in that bed, so young, like the years had fallen away and she was my little girl again, safe in her childhood home. I made tea and sat at the kitchen table, and that's when my son called. Michael lived in Boston, worked in finance, visited maybe once a year if we were lucky. "Mom," he said when I answered, "Derek called me. He's really upset. He said Sarah left and she's with you." I took a sip of my tea, letting the warmth spread through my chest. "That's right," I said. "He hit her, Michael. Your sister's husband hit her, and she's here where she's safe." There was a pause, and I could hear him processing this. "Look, I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding," he finally said. "Marriage is complicated. You and Dad have been together forever, you know how it is. People fight sometimes." I set my tea down very carefully. People fight with words, Michael. They don't fight with their fists. There's no misunderstanding when a man hits a woman. He sighed, that same exasperated sigh Richard always gave me when he thought I was being dramatic. "Mom, don't you think you're overreacting a little? I mean, Derek's a good guy. He's successful, he takes care of Sarah. Maybe she did something to provoke him." And there it was, my own son, the baby I'd carried and birthed and raised, telling me that his sister deserved to be hit because she might have provoked it. "Listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice ice cold. "Your sister is staying with me. She's safe here, and she's welcome here for as long as she needs. If you think she deserved what happened to her, if you think any woman deserves to be hit by the man who promised to love and protect her, then you're not the man I thought I raised. And frankly, Michael, I don't want to hear from you until you can call and apologize to your sister." I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking, my heart pounding. I'd never spoken to my son like that. I'd never spoken to anyone like that. It felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Richard came home around dinner time. I was in the kitchen making soup, and Sarah was still sleeping in the guest room. He walked in, looked at me, and said, "Is she still here?" I didn't answer, just kept stirring the soup. "This is ridiculous," he continued. "She needs to go home and work things out with her husband like an adult. I turned off the stove and faced him. "She's not going anywhere," I said. "This is her home. This is where she grew up. And she's welcome here for as long as she needs to stay." Richard's face turned red. "You're enabling her," he said. "You're teaching her to run away from her problems instead of dealing with them." I laughed, and it was a harsh, bitter sound that surprised both of us. "I'm teaching her?" I said. "Richard, you want to know what I've taught her? I've taught her that it's okay for men to ignore you. I've taught her that it's okay to shrink yourself to make someone else comfortable. I've taught her that love means sacrifice, even when you're the only one sacrificing. I've taught her, by my example, to accept less than she deserves because that's what I've been doing for 43 years with you." The words hung in the air between us, too big to take back, too true to deny. "If you're unhappy, you should have said something," Richard said, and the absurdity of that statement made me want to scream. "I've been saying something for 43 years, I told him. "You just haven't been listening. But I'm done now. I'm done being invisible in my own life. I'm done pretending that this is what marriage should look like. And I'm done watching my daughter make the same mistakes I made." Richard stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him trying to process this version of me he'd never met before. "What are you saying?" he asked, and his voice was quieter now, uncertain. "I'm saying things are going to change," I told him. "I'm saying I'm not cooking your breakfast anymore. I'm not doing your laundry anymore. I'm not managing your life anymore while you ignore mine. I'm saying that if you want to stay married to me, you're going to have to actually be married to me. That means respect. That means consideration. That means acting like I'm a person who matters." He opened his mouth to argue, but Sarah walked into the kitchen, her eyes still puffy from crying. She looked at both of us, clearly sensing the tension. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice small. "Everything's fine, sweetheart," I said, going to her and putting my arm around her shoulders. "I was just explaining to your father that you're staying here, and he's going to be respectful about that, aren't you, Richard?" He looked at Sarah, really looked at her, and I saw him notice the mark on her face for the first time. Something shifted in his expression, just slightly, like a door opening a crack. "Yeah," he said finally. "Of course she can stay." It wasn't much, but it was something. A small acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, he'd been wrong. The next few days were tense, but manageable. Richard mostly stayed out of our way, and I spent my time taking care of Sarah. We talked for hours, really talked, about her marriage and my marriage and all the ways we'd both settled for less. She told me about the first time Derek had been controlling, how he'd isolated her from her friends by making her feel guilty for spending time with them. She told me about the financial manipulation, how he'd convinced her to put all her money into a joint account he controlled. She told me about the emotional abuse, the constant criticism disguised as jokes, the way he'd make her feel stupid for asking questions or having opinions. One afternoon, we sat together on the couch drinking chamomile tea, and Sarah finally opened up about the wedding planning. "He made all the decisions," she said, staring into her cup. "I wanted a small ceremony, something intimate with just close friends and family. But Derek insisted on the big venue, the expensive catering, the whole production. He said it was important for his career, for his image, and I just went along with it because I thought that's what you do when you love someone. You compromise." She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "But Mom, I did all the compromising, every single time. What restaurant we went to, what shows we watched, where we went on vacation, what color to paint the living room. Everything was his choice, and I told myself I was being flexible, being easygoing, being a good wife. When did I stop having my own opinions? When did I become so afraid of disagreeing with him?" And I told her my truth. I told her about the forgotten birthdays and anniversaries. I told her about the watch Richard had bought himself with our money. I told her about the twin beds and the silence and the slow death of everything I'd thought marriage was supposed to be. We cried together, mother and daughter, mourning the lives we'd thought we were building and acknowledging the reality we'd been living instead. It was painful and necessary and healing in a way I hadn't expected. Then Derek showed up. It was a Saturday morning, about a week after Sarah had left. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard pounding on the door. Sarah was in the shower, and Richard had gone to the hardware store. I opened the door to find Derek standing there, looking disheveled and angry. "Where's my wife?" he demanded, pushing past me into the apartment. "She's not your wife when you're hitting her," I said, following him into the living room. "She's a person you've abused, and she doesn't owe you anything." He spun around to face me, and I saw the same rage in his eyes that must have been there when he hit Sarah. "You don't understand our marriage," he said. "You've turned her against me. This is all your fault." I stood my ground, even though my heart was racing. "My fault?" I said. "Derek, you're the one who chose to hit your wife over a question about Pepper. You're the one who's been controlling and manipulating her for years. I didn't turn her against you. You did that all by yourself." He took a step toward me, and for a second I thought he might hit me too. But then Sarah's voice came from the hallway. "Get out." She was standing there in her bathrobe, her hair still wet. Her face calm, but her voice strong. "Get out of here, Derek. I'm not coming back." He turned to her, and his expression changed, became pleading. "Baby, please," he said. "I'm sorry. I was stressed about work, and I overreacted. It won't happen again. I promise it won't happen again." Sarah shook her head. "You're right. It won't happen again, because I won't be there. I want a divorce, Derek. I'm done." He stared at her like she'd slapped him. "You don't mean that," he said. "We can go to counseling. We can work this out." "I mean it," Sarah said, and I could hear the certainty in her voice. "I deserve better than this. I deserve a partner who respects me, who doesn't hurt me, who doesn't make me feel small. And that's not you." Derek looked at me, like I was supposed to help him, like I was supposed to convince my daughter to go back to her abuser. "This is your influence," he said. "You're bitter about your own marriage, and you're taking it out on us." I smiled at him then, a real smile. "You're right," I said. "I am bitter about my own marriage. I wasted 43 years on a man who doesn't see me, but I'm not going to let my daughter waste another day on a man who hurts her." He tried to argue, tried to make promises, tried to make Sarah feel guilty, but she stood firm, and eventually he left, slamming the door behind him so hard that a picture fell off the wall. Sarah and I stood in the living room in silence for a moment, and then she started laughing. Not a happy laugh, but a relieved one, like she'd just put down something heavy she'd been carrying for too long. "I did it," she said. "I actually did it." I hugged her, and we stood there in the middle of the living room, two women who'd finally found their voices. The legal process started immediately. Sarah filed for divorce and got a restraining order against Derek. He fought it at first, hired an expensive lawyer, tried to make her look unstable. But she had documentation, photos of the bruise on her face, text messages showing his controlling behavior. The restraining order was granted, and Sarah started the process of untangling her life from his. It was messy and painful and expensive, but she never wavered. And I was there for every step, every lawyer meeting, every moment of doubt. About 2 weeks after Sarah moved in, I got a call from an old friend, Margaret. We'd worked together at the diner 30 years ago, stayed in touch sporadically over the years. She'd heard from someone who'd heard from someone else that Sarah was staying with me, that things were difficult. "I know this is forward," Margaret said, "but I'm part of a women's support group at my church. We meet every Tuesday evening. It's just women talking about their lives, their struggles, supporting each other. Would you want to come? You could bring Sarah if she's interested." I almost said no out of habit, out of the ingrained belief that I should keep my problems private. But then I thought about everything that had changed in the past few weeks and said yes. That Tuesday, Sarah and I drove to the church on the south side. The group met in a small room with folding chairs arranged in a circle. There were maybe 10 women there, ranging in age from their 30s to their 70s. Margaret introduced us, and everyone welcomed us with genuine warmth. The facilitator, a woman named Joyce, asked if anyone wanted to share. For a while, I just listened. Women talked about difficult marriages, about children who disappointed them, about financial struggles and health problems, and the general exhaustion of being a woman in a world that often didn't value them. And then, almost without meaning to, I started talking. I told them about Richard, about the 43 years of being invisible. I told them about Sarah and Derek, about finding the courage to help my daughter even when I couldn't help myself. I told them about the forgotten birthdays and the watch and the twin beds and the slow erosion of my sense of self. And as I talked, I saw recognition in their eyes. They understood. They'd lived versions of this story themselves. When I finished, there was a moment of silence, and then one of the older women, Louise, said, "The bravest thing you can do is start valuing yourself. It's never too late." Her words hit me like a physical blow, and I realized she was right. I'd spent my whole life waiting for someone else to value me, to see me, to choose me. But the person who needed to choose me first was me. I started making changes, small ones at first, then bigger ones. I opened my own bank account and had my paycheck from the grocery store deposited there. I bought myself new clothes, not expensive ones, just things that made me feel good when I wore them. I started going to the support group every Tuesday, and Sarah came with me most weeks. We were building a new life, both of us, one choice at a time. Richard noticed, of course. He didn't like the changes, complained about having to do his own laundry and cook his own meals. But I held firm. "This is what equality looks like," I told him. "If you don't like it, you know where the door is." One evening, about a month after Sarah had left Derek, I was going through our financial documents. I wanted to understand exactly where we stood, what assets we had, what I'd be entitled to if I decided to divorce Richard. What I found shocked me. Richard had been secretly investing money in the stock market, money I didn't know we had. He'd been doing it for years, apparently, and he'd done well. There were stocks worth tens of thousands of dollars, dividend payments being deposited into an account only he had access to. He'd built a small fortune while telling me we couldn't afford vacations or home repairs or anything that might have brought me joy. I confronted him that night. "When were you going to tell me about the investment account?" I asked, setting the statements down in front of him. He barely glanced at them. "That's my money," he said. "I earned it. I invested it." I felt a white-hot anger rise in my chest. "We've been married for 43 years, I said. "Everything is community property, and while you were building your secret fortune, I was working extra shifts to help pay for Sarah's education and our daily expenses. You let me struggle while you had money you were hiding from me." He finally looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. He was afraid I was going to take his money, his security, his comfort. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want a divorce," I said, and the words came out easier than I expected. "I want half of everything, including that investment account. I want to start over. I want to find out who I am when I'm not spending all my energy making myself small enough to fit into your life." He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him calculating, weighing his options. "You'll regret this," he said finally. "You're too old to start over. You'll be alone." I smiled at him, and it was genuine. "Richard, I've been alone for 43 years. At least now I'll be alone on my own terms." The divorce process started the next week. I hired a lawyer, a woman who specialized in cases where one spouse had hidden assets. She was fierce and competent, and everything I wished I'd been for myself all those years. Richard fought it, of course. Tried to claim that the investment money was his alone because he'd been the primary earner for most of our marriage. But my lawyer demolished that argument. She showed the court that I'd worked continuously, that I'd sacrificed my own career advancement to support Richard's, that I'd been an equal partner even if the paychecks weren't always equal. The settlement took months to finalize, but when it did, I walked away with half of everything, including half of that secret investment account. It wasn't a vast fortune by any means, but it was enough. Enough to give me options. Enough to give me freedom. During those months of legal proceedings, I discovered parts of myself I'd buried for decades. I started keeping a journal, writing down my thoughts and feelings every night before bed. At first, the pages were filled with anger and bitterness, pages and pages of everything I'd never been allowed to say, every hurt I'd swallowed, every moment of disrespect I'd endured. I wrote about the time Richard forgot our 20th anniversary, about how he'd ridiculed my dreams of going back to school, about the countless small cruelties that had accumulated over the years like sediment at the bottom of a river. But slowly, the tone of my entries began to shift. I started writing about hope instead of hurt. I wrote about the book I was reading, about a conversation I'd had with Mrs. Thompson, about a sunset I'd watched from my balcony that had moved me to tears. I wrote about Sarah's progress, how I could see her becoming stronger each day, how her laugh was returning, genuine and full. I wrote about the woman I was becoming, someone I was just beginning to know and, surprisingly, starting to like. One particularly difficult day during the divorce proceedings, Richard's lawyer had tried to paint me as unstable, as someone who had abandoned her husband without cause. I sat in that conference room, listening to this stranger twist 43 years of my life into a narrative where I was the villain, and something inside me remained unshakable. I looked at my lawyer, who gave me a reassuring nod, and I realized that their words couldn't hurt me anymore. The truth was the truth, and I knew it in my bones. No amount of legal maneuvering could change what I'd lived through or invalidate my decision to choose myself. Sarah's divorce from Derek finalized around the same time. He'd tried to drag it out, tried to make her life miserable, but in the end, he had to let her go. She walked away with her portion of their assets too, including half the value of that house in Naperville with its granite countertops. She sold her half to Derek and used the money to put a down payment on a small condo in the city, close to me. The day both our divorces were finalized, Sarah and I went to Navy Pier. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, the kind where the sky is impossibly blue and the air smells like possibility. We walked along the pier, eating overpriced ice cream and watching the boats on Lake Michigan. And we didn't talk about the divorces or the past or anything heavy. We just existed together, two free women enjoying a beautiful day. At one point, Sarah stopped walking and turned to me with tears in her eyes. "We did it, Mom," she said. "We actually did it." And I knew she wasn't just talking about the legal proceedings. She was talking about reclaiming our lives, about choosing ourselves, about having the courage to start over even when we were terrified. Once the divorces were final and the dust had settled, I did something I'd never done before. I took a vacation by myself. Not anywhere exotic or expensive, just a week in a cabin in Wisconsin, on a lake surrounded by trees. I brought books I'd been meaning to read for years and a journal to write in. I spent my days sitting on the dock with my feet in the water, watching the sun move across the sky. I wrote about my life, about my mistakes, about the woman I'd been and the woman I wanted to become. I cried a lot during that week, mourning all the years I'd lost. But I also laughed, feeling lighter than I had in decades. On my last day at the cabin, I went for a walk in the woods. The air smelled like pine and earth and possibility. I thought about Louise's words from the support group. It's never too late to start valuing yourself. I thought about Sarah, rebuilding her life with courage and determination. I thought about all the women in that support group, fighting their own battles, finding their own strength. And I realized that I wasn't alone, had never really been alone. I'd just been looking for validation in the wrong places. The validation I needed had to come from within. When I got back to Chicago, I made more changes. I quit my job at the grocery store and got a position at a small bookstore on the north side. It paid less, but I loved it. I was surrounded by stories, by possibilities, by proof that people could change and grow and start over. I joined a book club and met women who became real friends, women who saw me and valued me and chose me. I started taking a painting class on Thursday evenings, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. My paintings weren't good, but they were mine, and that was enough. Sarah thrived in her new life too. She threw herself into her work with renewed energy, got a promotion, started dating a kind man who treated her with respect. We had dinner together every Sunday, just the two of us, talking and laughing and sometimes crying about everything we'd been through. Our relationship deepened in ways it never had when I was still with Richard. We weren't just mother and daughter anymore. We were friends, allies, fellow survivors. One Sunday, she told me she'd started volunteering at a domestic violence shelter, helping other women find the courage to leave abusive situations. I'd never been more proud of her. Richard, on the other hand, struggled. He moved into a small apartment on the south side, closer to the hardware store where he worked. He called me sometimes, usually late at night, wanting to talk about the past, about what went wrong, about whether we could try again. I was kind, but firm. We can be civil, I told him. We can be respectful when we see each other at family events, but we can't be married. That chapter is closed. He didn't understand. Kept insisting that he could change, that things could be different. But I knew better. People could change, but they had to want to. And Richard wanted things to go back to the way they were, which meant he didn't really want to change at all. About 6 months after our divorce was final, something unexpected happened. I got a call from Michael, my son in Boston. We hadn't spoken since that conversation when Sarah first moved in, when he'd suggested she'd provoked Derek. "Mom," he said when I answered, his voice tentative. "I owe you an apology, a big one." I didn't say anything, just waited. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," he continued, "about how I responded when you told me what Derek did. And I was wrong. I was so wrong. I don't know why I said those things. Maybe because it was easier to blame Sarah than to admit that someone I knew, someone I'd welcomed into our family, could do something like that. Maybe, I said, my voice neutral. "I called Sarah," he said. "We talked for a long time. She told me everything, about Derek and about you and Dad, about the divorce. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't there for either of you. I'm sorry I dismissed what you were going through. I'm sorry I was more concerned with keeping the peace than standing up for what was right." I felt tears prick my eyes. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." We talked for over an hour that day, really talked, and by the end of the call, I felt like I had my son back. Not the boy I'd raised, but the man he'd become, someone who could admit when he was wrong and try to do better. The second year after my divorce was even better than the first. I traveled more, took weekend trips to places I'd always wanted to see. I went to New York and saw a Broadway show, something I'd dreamed about since I was a girl. I went to Nashville and listened to live music in small bars. I went to the ocean for the first time in 30 years and stood in the waves feeling the power of the water against my legs. Each trip was a gift I gave myself, proof that I mattered, that my desires mattered, that my life could be more than service to others. I also started writing. Nothing fancy, just a blog where I shared my story, the mistakes I'd made and the lessons I'd learned. I wrote about staying too long in a marriage that had stopped serving me. I wrote about the courage it took to start over at 62. I wrote about supporting my daughter through her own divorce and watching her bloom into the woman she was always meant to be. The response surprised me. Women from all over the country reached out, sharing their own stories, thanking me for giving voice to experiences they'd never talked about. I realized that my pain had a purpose, that by sharing it, I could help others feel less alone. Sarah met someone special, a man named Alex who worked in education. He was gentle and funny and genuinely interested in her life. When she introduced us, I watched carefully, looking for red flags, signs of control or manipulation. But all I saw was respect and affection. He asked her opinion on things and actually listened to her answers. He made plans around her schedule, not expecting her to rearrange her life for him. He treated her like an equal partner, which was all I'd ever wanted for her. They took things slow, both of them gun-shy after their previous relationships. But I could see them building something real and healthy, and it gave me hope. On what would have been my 45th wedding anniversary, I did something symbolic. I took off my wedding ring, which I'd continued wearing out of habit even after the divorce, and I sold it. I used the money to buy myself a ring, a simple silver band that I wore on my right hand. It was a promise to myself, a reminder that I would never again make myself small for someone else's comfort. That evening, Sarah took me out to dinner at a nice restaurant downtown. We toasted to new beginnings, to lessons learned the hard way, to the strength we'd found in each other. "I'm proud of you, Mom," Sarah said, raising her glass. "I know that's a weird thing for a daughter to say to her mother, but I am. You saved me, and then you saved yourself." I clinked my glass against hers. "We saved each other," I said, and it was true. If Sarah hadn't called me that morning, if I hadn't heard the pain in her voice and recognized it as an echo of my own, I might still be in that apartment making breakfast for a man who never saw me. Her crisis had been my wake-up call, and my strength had given her permission to be strong too. The support group at Margaret's church became a constant in my life. I never missed a Tuesday meeting unless I was out of town. Over time, I became one of the older members, someone newer women looked to for guidance. I tried to be honest with them, to share not just my triumphs but my struggles and failures. I wanted them to know that starting over was hard, that there were days I doubted myself, days I felt lonely and scared. But I also wanted them to know that it was worth it, that the fear was temporary but the freedom was permanent. One Tuesday evening, a young woman came to the group for the first time. She was maybe 30, with a black eye she'd tried to cover with makeup. She sat quietly through most of the meeting, but at the end she spoke up. "How did you know when to leave?" she asked, looking directly at me. "How did you know you'd be okay?" I thought about that question for a moment. "I didn't know," I told her honestly. I was terrified. But I knew that staying meant dying slowly, losing myself piece by piece until there was nothing left. And I decided that being scared but alive was better than being comfortable but dead inside. The young woman started crying, and the facilitator, Joyce, went to sit beside her. Later, after the meeting, the young woman came up to me. "Thank you," she said. "I think I needed to hear that. I think I've been waiting for someone to tell me it's okay to leave, that I'm not being selfish or weak." I took her hand. "You're not selfish or weak," I said. "You're surviving. And when you're ready, you'll do more than survive. You'll thrive." She left that night with phone numbers for domestic violence resources and the knowledge that she had a community of women who would support her no matter what she decided. 3 years after my divorce, I felt like a completely different person. I'd gained weight, which bothered me at first until I realized it was because I was finally eating meals I enjoyed, instead of meals designed to please someone else. I'd let my hair grow out, stopped dyeing it the dark brown Richard had preferred, let it go silver naturally. I wore colors I liked, bright blues and purples and greens, instead of the neutral tones I'd worn for decades. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who was fully present in her own life, and it was beautiful. I'd also developed a new relationship with money. The settlement from my divorce, combined with my portion of that secret investment account Richard had built, gave me a financial cushion I'd never had before. I was careful with it, invested it wisely, but I also allowed myself to enjoy it. I bought a comfortable chair for my apartment, the kind that cradled your body and made you never want to get up. I treated Sarah to spa days and nice dinners. I donated to the domestic violence shelter where Sarah volunteered and to the church that hosted our support group. Having money meant having choices, and having choices meant having freedom. Richard reached out occasionally, usually around holidays or significant dates. His messages were always the same variations on a theme. He missed me, he'd made mistakes. Couldn't we try again? I responded politely but briefly. I didn't hate him, didn't wish him ill. I just didn't want to be married to him anymore. I'd learned that you could forgive someone without letting them back into your life. That closure was something you gave yourself, not something you needed from the person who'd hurt you. The most unexpected development in my new life was my friendship with Mrs. Thompson, my neighbor from the apartment building. She was 78, a widow who'd lost her husband 5 years earlier. We started having coffee together every Wednesday morning, sharing our stories, our fears, our dreams for whatever time we had left. She'd been married for 56 years, and unlike my marriage, hers had been happy. But she understood the courage it took to leave an unhappy situation, admired me for choosing myself even when it was hard. "You know what I regret?" Mrs. Thompson said one Wednesday morning. "I regret that I never lived alone. I went from my parents' house to my husband's house, and now I'm here by myself for the first time in my life, and I'm discovering things about myself I never knew. I wonder who I might have been if I'd had the chance to be just me for a while, before I became someone's daughter or wife or mother." Her words resonated with me. I'd had that same thought so many times, wondered about the woman I might have been if I'd traveled or pursued a career, or just spent time figuring out who I was before I tied my identity to someone else. Sarah's relationship with Alex grew serious. They'd been dating for almost 2 years when he proposed, and Sarah called me immediately after saying yes. "I know this is fast," she said, the joy evident in her voice. "But Mom, it's so different this time. He's so different. We're building something together, equally, and it feels right in a way nothing with Derek ever did." I was happy for her, genuinely happy, but I was also cautious. "Take your time," I told her. "There's no rush. Make sure you're choosing this because you want it, not because you think you should." She laughed. "I learned that lesson from watching you, Mom. I'm choosing this because it makes me happy, because he makes me happy, because we make each other better." They got married the following spring in a small ceremony in Lincoln Park. It was nothing like Sarah's first wedding with Derek, no elaborate venue or hundreds of guests. Just close friends and family, simple vows, genuine love. I watched my daughter marry a man who clearly adored her, who stood beside her as an equal partner, and I felt a sense of peace I'd never experienced before. This was what I'd wanted for her all along. This was what I'd wanted for myself, but never thought to demand. Michael came from Boston with his wife and kids, and we spent the weekend together, a family that looked very different from the one I'd grown up in, but was so much healthier. Richard was invited to the wedding, because Sarah was generous like that, but he declined. He sent a gift, a generous check that was probably his way of trying to prove he wasn't all bad, and a card that said he was happy for her. Sarah accepted it graciously and moved on. She'd done her own work, her own healing, and she didn't need his approval or validation any more than I did. We'd both learned that the only approval that mattered was our own. At the reception, after the first dance and the toasts, Sarah pulled me aside. "Thank you," she said, hugging me tight. "Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to choose yourself. That you can love someone and still leave if they're not good for you. That starting over isn't the end of the world. It's the beginning." I hugged her back, fighting tears. "You would have figured it out eventually," I said. "You're stronger than you know." She shook her head. "Maybe. But it would have taken me a lot longer without you. You saved my life, Mom. You literally saved my life." Now, 5 years after that phone call that changed everything, I sit on the balcony of my small apartment in Chicago, watching the sun set over the city. The skyline glows orange and pink, the buildings casting long shadows across the streets below. I have a glass of wine in my hand, something nice I treated myself to from the wine shop down the street. Tomorrow, I'm flying to Seattle to visit Michael and his family. Next month, I'm going on a cruise with some friends from the book club. In the fall, I'm signed up for a creative writing class at the community college. My life isn't perfect. I still have days when I feel lonely, when I wonder if I made the right choices, when I miss having a partner to share things with. But those days are fewer and farther between, and when they come, I've learned to sit with the discomfort instead of running from it. I've learned that being alone isn't the same as being lonely, that solitude can be a gift if you know how to receive it. I've learned that I'm enough, just as I am, without needing anyone else to complete me or validate me or choose me. The past 5 years have taught me more than the previous 62 combined. I've learned that it's never too late to start over, never too late to choose yourself, never too late to build the life you actually want instead of the life you think you should want. I've learned that transformation doesn't happen overnight, that it's a series of small choices made every day to honor yourself and your worth. I've learned that asking for help isn't weakness, that community is essential, that we all need people who see us and support us and remind us who we are when we forget. Most importantly, I've learned that my story isn't unique. Everywhere I go, I meet women who've lived some version of what I lived, who've stayed too long in situations that diminished them, who've sacrificed their own happiness for the comfort of others. And when I share my story with them, when I tell them about the phone call from Sarah and the decision to leave Richard, and the scary, beautiful process of rebuilding my life, I see recognition in their eyes. I see hope. I see the possibility that maybe, just maybe, they can do it too. The sun has fully set now, the city lights beginning to twinkle against the darkening sky. I finish my wine and stand up, stretching my back, feeling the pleasant ache of muscles that worked hard in my painting class earlier today. I look at the reflection in the glass door, and I see a woman who's been through hell and came out stronger. I see silver hair and laugh lines and a body that's carried me through 67 years of life. I see someone who matters, who has value, who deserves respect and love and all the good things life has to offer. Have you ever lived something like this? Or do you know someone who has? Someone who stayed too long, gave too much, lost themselves in the process of loving someone else. If my story resonates with you, please share your experience in the comments below. And if you found this story meaningful, if it gave you hope or courage, or just the comfort of knowing you're not alone, I'd be grateful if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. These stories need to be told, these voices need to be heard, and your support helps ensure that the message reaches someone who desperately needs to hear it. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being part of this community of survivors and warriors and women who refuse to be invisible anymore.